Good morning. I want to begin by giving thanks to Dylan McLean, Chloe Kilcrease, and Juliana Mendenhall, VISTA members of the University of Arkansas at Monticello Office of Student Engagement Center for College and Career Readiness. The UAM Center for College and Career Readiness is an AmeriCorps VISTA project. I also want to acknowledge Roberta Thomas, who is the project director, and Becky Ryburn, who assists the project in many ways. Finally, I want to acknowledge Mr. Michael Davila and Ember Davis for their technical assistance in this project. For this morning's talk, I've adopted the theme of freedom, peace, equity, justice, and love. My intention is to align this theme with the life and works of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. As many in our country and around the world pause to celebrate his legacy, I will talk about who Dr. King is, what he stood for, and how we can implement principles from his life and works to continue the legacy. To be clear, Dr. King's dream was to foster a more just, equitable, peaceful, and loving society that promoted freedom for all. However, my real focus is not on Dr. King, but rather on our contemporary responsibility to help move society toward a greater measure of peace, equity, justice, love, and of course, freedom for all. In my quest, I will share a set of principles that I've gleaned from studying Dr. King's life and work. These principles will empower us to effectively engage in the quest to eliminate the systemic injustices and inequities that are preventing America and the world from reaching our full potential. I suggest that what most people know about Dr. King and the civil rights movement is limited to a few sound bites from people who are not really that knowledgeable about the man or the movement. As a result, much of what we hear is more misinformation than true knowledge. Who is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.? What did he stand for? Why did he do the things that he did? What is the civil rights movement? How can we live in a manner that ensures that his life and the lives of countless others who fought, taught, and died to open doors of opportunity do not go in vain? Parenthetically, many people had begun to take these doors of opportunity for granted prior to the most recent events of racial and civic unrest. Please know that it is not my intent to talk down to anyone. I acknowledge that many people are very familiar with Dr. King and the civil rights movement, who are very familiar with the efforts of many others, both black and white, to the establishment of civil rights and equity in the United States. However, there are also countless people who know very little about the same. As Dr. Aaron Thompson states, in part, this lack of knowledge can be attributed to the fact that America was built on a system that diminished and disenfranchised people of color. Slavery emanated from white Americans' belief that blacks were not fully human and therefore not deserving of equal or equitable treatment. After approximately 250 years, slavery ended, but Jim Crow laws and other societal structures continued to force discrimination on and foment disenfranchisement of African Americans. These structures cemented racism as a core component of American culture and an operational feature of the American system. I do realize that there are lots of people who think that we already live in a just and equitable society where all people are free to express and live by their beliefs. However, most of these people who enjoy a measure of wealth, power, and privilege that was built upon a foundation of inequality and injustices, and this was bequeathed to many of these individuals and or groups. Further, most of the people who think that we already live in a just and equitable society don't experience the impact of injustices, discrimination, and the inequitable distribution of goods and services on a daily basis. I pause to underscore the significance of student involvement in this ongoing struggle by highlighting two pivotal events in the civil rights movement. First, you should recall the Little Rock Nine, an event where 9 African-American high school students integrated the Little Rock, Arkansas school system in 1957 by attending Little Rock Central High School. These young teenagers, and certainly their parents, showed tremendous courage in the face of grave danger. The second event is the Greensboro sit-ins. The sit-in started on February the 1st, 1960, when 4 African-American college students from North Carolina A&T College, now the historically black North Carolina A&T State University, sat down at the then all-white Woolworth's restaurant counter and refused to move until they were served. Having studied Mahatma Gandhi's principles of nonviolent protest, these young men were well prepared, organized, and had calculated how to orchestrate these sit-ins for maximum success. In some ways, I think that we, particularly African Americans and other people of color, are doing an injustice to the civil rights movement, the legacy of Dr. King, and the legacy of countless others who sacrificed so much. Throughout history, and especially during the civil rights movement, people fought, taught, suffered, and died to open doors that allow blacks to go places that we could not go, say things that we could not say, hold jobs that we could not even apply for, and marry people that we couldn't even look in the eye. Many people take this as a sign or a symbol that we now live in an equitable and just society. I contend that these truths only set us on a stronger foundation to fight for true justice, equity, and peace. Unfortunately, many of us who have benefited from the historical achievements of the civil rights movement have largely disengaged from the struggle for justice and equity because things are rather good for us. Dr. King emphasized societal, not individual achievements. It also seems that there is a politics of division that influences people who are engaged in the struggle to be only concerned about, quote, their slice of the pie, as opposed to working to ensure that the pie is expanded such that everyone can get a large enough slice to engage in abundant life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Ironically, when you read some of the speeches and writings of Dr. King, if you remove the dates, you might think that they're being given today. We face many of the same problems today that we faced in the 1960s. While they show up in different forms, they are still rooted in injustice, the unequal distribution of power, wealth, and opportunity. There is still wide-scale discrimination, particularly gender, race, and class in America. Dr. King was a man who stood for and was motivated by the quest to promote social justice and equity, such that the human condition was improved for everyone, not just a privileged few. Let me share with you some of his own words from his book, Why We Can't Wait, as he discussed the significance of some of the early events of the civil rights movement. And I quote, "For the first time in the long and turbulent history of the nation, almost 1,000 cities were engulfed in civil turmoil, with violence trembling just below the surface. A submerged social group, propelled by a burning need for justice, lifting itself with sudden swiftness, moving with determination and a majestic scorn for risk and danger, creating an uprising so powerful that it shook a huge society from its comfortable base." End quote. Ironically, atop a raging pandemic, when we have seen similar uprisings and raging civil unrest in reaction to the mounting number of African Americans dying in police-related incidents, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and many others. My fear is that unlike the uprising that Dr. King spoke of, our contemporary uprisings are short-lived and often poorly organized. Today, more than ever, there's a need for greater organization and sustainability. Today's efforts must build upon previous successes. The result of the uprising led by Dr. King, that is the civil rights movement as we know it today, opened doors for people, you and I, to take the fight for justice, equity, and peace to a new level. By peace, I mean harmony between humans and the love and purposes of the God of creation. I acknowledge that there are many people who are listening that don't believe in God or creation. If so, this is your right, and I do not condemn you for it. However, I do hope that we can agree that the pursuit of justice, equality, and peace is a noble pursuit. Dr. King and many others who fought before him dealt with the most blatant issues that were easy to identify and hard to deny. Today, we must deal with root issues that are much more difficult to identify and are much easier for people who want to maintain the status quo to spin and conceal. While I agree with others who echo that we don't need the same tactics or to pursue the same short-term goals, the only reason that we do not is because they were used so successfully in the 60s. Our task is to identify new methods and strategies to advance the quest for justice, equity, and peace. Let's not let their works, their sacrifices, and their risks go in vain, nor be lost in the annals of American history. I pause to remind us that Dr. King's leadership grew out of the African American Christian church. While I'm not here to preach religion, it is a travesty and historical injustice for us to forget or act like the Black church has not or does not play a significant role in the promotion of societal freedom, justice, and equity. If for no other reason, I believe that it's important to recall this fact because what Dr. King was fighting for was bigger than Dr. King. I believe that what is commonly referred to as Dr. King's dream is God's design and vision for humanity. Dr. King himself surely understood this, as evidenced by his declaration that he has been to the mountaintop and looked over, that he realized that one day we would overcome, that he didn't believe nor deeply desire to live a long life. Dr. King realized that this was not his movement, that the movement was about us rather than me. My hope today is that more of us would see this as well. At this point, I want to borrow an Old Testament story from the Holy Bible. There was a prophet by the name of Habakkuk who was obviously very concerned, perhaps even distraught about societal conditions. As a prophet, Habakkuk understood that he could communicate with the Creator. He also understood that God desired social justice, equity, and peace. Thus, Habakkuk challenged God to do something about the injustices that he was observing. After a long conversation where he essentially blamed God for the persistent injustices that were in the land, he sat down to see how God would answer or what God would do. When God replied to Habakkuk, God essentially said that God was not going to do anything. Rather than taking direct action, God gave Habakkuk some instructions on how he could provide leadership to the people that would empower them to do something about their own concerns. God's specific reply to Habakkuk was to write the vision down, make it plain so that those who read it would understand and participate in it. Today, as I reflect upon the civil rights movement and the life and legacy of Dr. King, this to a large extent represents Dr. King's situation and, more importantly, ours. As we reflect upon the countless contribution of Blacks and the movements that they engineered, we will see a vision that compels us to continue to engage in the quest for peace, equity, justice, love, and freedom for all. It will stop us from depending on others, as God was saying to Habakkuk, and impel us to begin to take action for ourselves about the things that we are concerned about. How can we use the life and works of Dr. King to find our part in establishing peace, equity, justice, love, and freedom for all? First, we should invest time reading the actual writings, speeches, and accounts of Dr. King's life and works. I commend to you the works that were written by Dr. King himself, by people who were close to him, or by people who have carefully studied him. A very good place to start is with the book, A Testament of Hope. Second, we can reflect upon and apply the following principles and practices that I believe guided Dr. King's life, and we can apply these principles and practices to our own quest to promote the common good. If you're a student, these principles will also help you to be more successful in your academic pursuits. The principles, as I list them, are preparation, courage, a commitment to love rather than hate, open and honest communication along with civil dialogue, and a willingness to communicate and work with a diverse group of people. Let's take each principle and just say a little bit about each one. Preparation. Dr. King was a well-educated, lifelong learner. He studied broadly and abroad. Even after obtaining his PhD in religion and philosophy, he went to India to essentially intern with Mahatma Gandhi. It was there that he learned the principles of nonviolent active resistance. Nonviolence was the foundation of his work. Dr. King understood at least two things about violence. One, he understood that violence is not always physical. And secondly, he understood that nonviolence is a commitment to do no harm to others or to society. Like Dr. King, I encourage you to be a well-educated, lifelong learner who understands your life purpose and commit to fulfilling it no matter the cost. I also invite you to commit to living in a way where you never do intentional harm to another person. Courage, in its simplest form. Courage is the ability to overcome fear. The foundation of courage is conviction. What are your convictions? What is important to you? What are you willing to suffer and, if necessary, to die for? Some think that courage is the absence of fear. We see slogans on clothes such as "no fear" and statements in music and other forms of media that insinuate that we must be fearless. People who experience great success are not the ones who are fearless, but rather the ones who, like Dr. King, learn to do what they do while they are afraid. A commitment to love rather than hate. Foundationally, we must commit to loving everyone, even those who hate us. We must have friends and frenemies. At its core, love is most concerned with the well-being of others. It means to bestow acts of kindness and generosity upon others with the expressed intention of blessing their lives. True love bestows these acts upon others even when they do not deserve them. Love is patient, kind, humble, courteous, full of hope and optimism, persistent. It is unselfish, truthful, enduring, and sees the best rather than the worst in others. That's love. However, the principle is to love rather than hate. To hate is to love less. It is an inferior human emotion that prevents us from being and doing our best. Naturally, hate grows out of anger, resentment, and bitterness. Only love can conquer hate. When Dr. King spoke of love, he referred to agape. He defined agape as the character of God working through humans. Thus, agape originates with God and flows through us. To defeat hate with love, we must cherish our relationship with God, our relationship with ourselves, and our relationship with other humans. And we must make these choices above resentment, above bitterness, and above revenge. The one thing that love is not is blind. Dr. King's desire and commitment to living in love was so strong that he saw anger and bitterness as an enemy that too often sought to enter his mind and heart. I quote, "Along the way of life, someone must have sense enough and morality enough to cut off the chain of hate and evil. The greatest way to do that is through love. I believe firmly that love is a transforming power that can lift a whole community to new horizons of fair play, goodwill, and of justice." Open and honest communication. Open and honest communication compel one to speak truth in love. No matter where they are, who they are talking to, or what they think that it might cost them, Dr. King spoke truth in the face of constant threats against his life and that of his family and close allies. Fifth and finally, Dr. King lived by a principle of a willingness to communicate with and work with a diverse group of people. Dr. King worked with people of all races, religions, and socioeconomic classes. He told them the truth about his positions, where they differed, and always looked for the common ground. Ron Heifetz, in his excellent book titled Leadership Without Easy Answers, speaks eloquently about how Dr. King and President Lyndon Johnson worked together, worked behind the scenes during the civil rights movement. They did so in a way that helped both to achieve their goals, even though their ideologies and allegiances were quite different. As I close, I challenge you to see learning and preparation as a lifelong endeavor. Please make an effort to learn more about Dr. King, who he was, how he prepared himself, what he was really trying to accomplish in the civil rights movement. As you reflect upon the principles that I've shared and discovered others from your own studies, please adopt and apply them to your own life. Both you and society will be better for it. Finally, I invite you to get involved in the ongoing struggle to help America live up to the founding principles that are often articulated but not always practiced. If you do so, you will find a great deal of success and peace in life. Perhaps more importantly, you will help a lot of other people and leave a legacy in the earth that will live long after you are gone. Thank you, and may God bless you. May God bless your family, your community, our nation, and the world.